Welcome to the J3U University Podcast. I'm your host, John Jewett.
And I'm your co-host, Luke Miller.
Our mission is to elevate the physique coaching standard
and to bring the highest level of competitor to the stage.
Let's jump into today's episode. Offseason isn't easier. It's just a different kind of hard. Today's episode, we're going to dive into differentiating between prep and offseason. What should carry over into prep to make your offseason successful, and what in the offseason should change to not be what you've been doing throughout contest prep. I think there's quite a few misconceptions here, and a lot of things where I think what you want to do is not what you need to be doing. And so we'll dive into this and try to really straighten everyone out and give you some good takeaways of how to get more out of your offseason.
Yeah, and I think it's a common myth, right? And I do want to kind of hear your take on this before I dive into kind of some things around goals and kind of how we manage this with clients. But I think people think all season is our time to chill and is our time to relax. And while I understand that thought process and that logic relative to kind of how contest preps can be structured, I honestly think the people that look at all season as arguably the largest potential to make the biggest difference in your physique career, as far as like what your glass ceiling is potentially within your competitive realm, is the people that make the most progress. They don't see the all season as chill. They see it as a place to execute at a level that is even greater than they did in the contest prep, because as an athlete, they're looking at how they can actually develop as an athlete long-term. And all season is where they learn these new skills of developing as that athlete. And it's pretty unparalleled how much an athlete can change in an all-season setting when they reflect on the contest prep previous, the amount of progress they made from the last show to this show, and then understand that there has to be new habits implemented in the off-season.
You do wonder where some of that mindset around truly like off season came about, because I know some of the more modern educators and athletes they call it, this is not off, it's improvement season, right. Which whatever you like to call it, it's semantics at this point, but what's done should always be the same no matter the naming. But the idea of being off, it's just more off of the timeline to compete, but you're still on as far as how you're executing your routine, goals, meals, etc. I don't know if like where there used to be like just some big influences in bodybuilding to where you would have more of the dirty bulk off season. You think back, I don't know if we won't throw out any names of old school bodybuilders that just like blew up in the off season, but and then I don't know if it's a newer competitor thing of like, oh, finally we can have more like free eating, and then like cheat meals were always the big thing in the off season. And that's like, this is when you can have your cheat meal. And we had really that naming tied into it to where I even had guys, I remember when I was first starting, had like cheat days where it's like, I just eat whatever I want. And so it's really easy to get tied up in like just truly being like a far deviation away from contest prep. But I feel like we've definitely shifted away from a lot of that. And you look at like, gosh, all the mainstream top bodybuilders, and everyone stays in really good shape throughout the quote unquote off season, right? And you don't see guys that are blowing up doing the dirty bulks anymore. And so it's like, well, we should learn from this, and why are these guys having so much success? And if this is what the genetic elite are doing, the genetic disadvantaged should be doing it even to a greater degree, right? And even if you do have the genetic advantage, who cares? Execute to the greatest degree, because it's just going to fast track you even more to moving up the ranks. So off season, it's not necessarily chill. It's still a constant, aggressiveness towards your goal. But like you said, Luke, but at the same time being patient. So I ask you, and throw this your way, is how does coaching behavior change moving from prep to off season with that mindset before even the athlete? Like, how do you shift as a coach where you're directing these athletes?
Some of it has to do with the goalpost, but I do want to make a pretty big point in that the way that you act as a coach can trickle down to your athletes. And so if you become a bit lackadaisical in this all-season phase and don't dot your I's, cross your T's in these phases. It's going to trickle down to how that athlete executes. And I would strongly urge that you look at the way that you kind of act in these different phases, whether it's pre-contest, during the contest prep, in that immediate post-show phase, and that off season, of what are you verbalizing to the athlete in order to keep a development mindset kind of throughout. Like, how are we shifting gears, right? Because during the contest prep, it's been all mirror-based. How's the physique looking? We're looking at body composition. We're looking into less gym-based stuff. Like, we're tracking to make sure that gym's not plummeting, but we're not like setting lift goals or things along those lines. And I really like to shift the goalposts into, here are the things that from a daily habits perspective that are going to make you a better athlete. I set some goals in the daily habits realm, but I especially set some goals in the training perspective. And a lot of times it can not only just be lift based, like numbers are easy for athletes, but I really like to set up ability to execute goal sets. And so this would be if in previous all seasons we couldn't do a certain pattern, let's say like a Smith machine squat, and that fits their goal set as far as what they need as an athlete, like that would be one of those goals heading into this all season is, how do we fix mobility, injury profile concerns in order to allow you to open up that movement pattern in this off season? And I've done it with a lot of athletes. In fact, Emily King is one that I've done this with. We Smith machine squatted the entire all season. And I put up her side-by-side of 9 weeks out last year to 9 weeks out this year on my Instagram. And it's like a completely different athlete. And a lot of it was just fixing kind of how she stabilized different patterns from a mobility stability standpoint, and then better cueing within squatting. And she ran that pattern progressively for almost 11 months. And you just look at this side-by-side and you can see the physique difference there. And maybe we can get Dylan to pop it up on the screen. But it's wild how simple these goals are. So when we trickle down behavior from the coach, it's not that we take a step back and relaxing how we communicate to the athlete. We just shift the focus of that urgency to execute on the day-to-day to different goals.
Yeah, I align with that so much, because training performance really in prep, it's not as exciting because you're just trying to kind of maintain, and you don't have a lot of the resources to fix issues if there's like movement pattern dysfunction going on. And so like that's really where you can shine in the off season. So I think it's always looking back at like your stage picks, what were the deficiencies there and how to address them. I think it could be simply looked at as, where do we need to build muscle? But a point to what you bring up is sometimes getting in positions of poses is more of a deficiency in, could be mobility, or it could be able to control that end range. Like an example of what I'm just, going on about here is that, like in my rear double, for example, I have a really hard time externally rotating my left arm to get it all the way back. And then what I notice on like even doing like that quarter turn on that same side is that to really get that arm opened up, say it simply, I really strain to do so. And so you're like, well, okay, I just need to like mobilize and practice your posing. But this same type of issue will translate into your training. Because what I've assessed is that, I could have Renee externally rotate my arm for me, and I can get the range, but I have really poor control and weakness. So in other words, my rotator cuff is extremely weak on that side, which means I lack stability to output force. So that means like my whole left side of my upper body could start lacking development on that side because of this lack of strength to be able to stabilize. And so that's part of my like prep work routine going into my push sessions, of being able to get into that range and then strengthen it, and then move to my next, main compound movements for the day. This will improve my posing as well. So this is like the time to address these things in prep. Try to, but again, nothing's going to stick and change like it will in the off season. So I think it's just always looking back and posing and thinking beyond just adding tissue, but also adding the ability to control ranges that are going to improve your posing and translate to your training. So like having probably the goal list of like things that need to be addressed. And so you can always have, a focus on short and long-term goals around your training or your posing or whatever it may be. So Luke, do you have a more of a goal list that you set short-term or long-term for these athletes, and maybe even speak to like timelines, because I think that is a big piece to keeping people on track and having a prep type mindset.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you bring up like kind of the goal set list, because I've started doing this for a few athletes that really struggle. It's not only goal setting, but it's block schedule organization, where like I'll not only set the goal list, but I'll put in blocks that have to be executed within their schedule in order to achieve these goals. And a way that we can point this out with athletes is when you get into contest prep, when cardio gets high, steps get high, you have a much strict time allotment. Like you can't just have as much time to waste unless you're just not working, right? And so they kind of operate in a block schedule without knowing it, because they do cardio every morning at this time, and then they have meal one at this time every day, right? And so I just take that structure, show them it on a schedule from a calendar perspective, and then I take the goals list and implement that into their block schedule. And then I obviously give them free rein to adjust it according to their life variables. This is one way to keep them focused. And then you switch that over into the timeline of like, hey, I expect us within this post-show phase to see X, Y, Z get better. We've got that 6 to 8 week time block on that timeline phase, and this is our setup to off season. And I might have goals specific to that post-show phase, which would be centered around sleep quality, schedule maintenance, adherence goals, things along those lines. And then when we get into off season, we're kind of looking into shifting it even further into the training aspect. And I've like had some people who are really, I don't want to say visionary, but they like to see what that future holds, that I'll map out the timeline a year and a half in advance of like the expectation is to have 2 to 3 pushes, whatever it is for that athlete, to actually close that gap from where we were on stage to where we need to be. And you'll see this a lot of times in people who just turn pro, like the physique that turned them pro is just not quite ready to come even close on an open stage. And that's where this can have huge value, because athletes like that, in my opinion, get into coasting. They just turned pro. They've got some validation for the work that they've put in. They know that they have the knowledge set and the experience set to do this well, and they don't put urgency on the day-to-day execution, and they coast. And then you see them 2.5 years later, they do their pro debut, and you look at that physique, and it's like, you're not really much better. And you wonder why.
I like I didn't think about the daily goal.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge one, because I think we're still thinking, even if you had a training goal, right, that could be a week to week of what you need to do and around the logbook or something, but a daily goal, and make sure that you have to execute. And I think that's huge, especially with routine is what just kind of fades off, right? The cardio slips, and then you can't get it in for the day because you have something else scheduled, and your meals get pushed back, and then just snowballs into just a very whimsical off season of like, yeah, I got my total food in for the day. Training happens sometime during the day, but it just makes a lack of ability to control your fatigue, your recovery, and be able to push training up as high as what you probably could have done a lot more with, but not able to. So like in prep right now for me, like I get up at 6:30, I work and walk on my walking pad for that time period. At 7:50, like there's no negotiation. I get off the thing and I go do 3 rounds of posing. I'm 12 weeks out, so this is what I've set as must happen before the rest of my day can continue. And when I do those things, like, man, it's so self-satisfying. Like, because I'll be honest, like the biggest worry and stressor for me is not being able to like control posing on stage. So start it now and like take control of that anxiety for myself and just make it better. And so when I do that, like every day I've already like achieved a goal and I'm excited for the day and I know I'm moving forward. I think that is awesome to be able to add into your athletes as a daily goal list to be able to nail. And then also very much keeps them very accountable during the week instead of just saying, well, yeah, I ate the food and I did the training. It's like, well, did you hit this, and that at your time schedules that you wanted to? And it's like, oh, no. Okay, we still have areas to improvement. So I guess one thing I wanted to add on for you for the coaching side that to bring up is around this, coaching piece of when the off season might feel like coasting, because I know there's those check-ins that can be, all right, everything looks good, keep going. And as a coach, could you start coasting and get a little complacent with the process just moving along? And I guess, how do you keep those checks and balances in place, Luke? And is that part of just how you do your check-ins and your data that you have laid out? Or is there something that you're always trying to dig with the athletes to make sure there's always something given back in a week? And then also maybe address the last thing to throw at you would be, when's it okay to not have something like to give back to the athlete other than keep going?
Yeah, the off season's probably where how you communicate what's needed in the check-in's a bit different. I think the biggest red flags for me are, especially post-show into the early stages of the long off season, is I'm fixing a lot of training stuff a lot of times, whether it be for an injury profile or a body part's just not up to par relative to the rest of the standards in that class. And people, like, they'll send it 1 or 2 times excited about the off season and think they're done. Like, we fixed it. We don't have to continue to monitor it. That's kind of the first place I start to like re-push somebody, like, hey, like, it was great. We watched it and did some fixes on the forefront, but like, you can slip back into old patterns really easily. Like, if you come from an athletic background in coaching, you'll know that people have what they call their DNA. So their DNA of how they operate or how they do things. And a lot of times the problems that crop up for these people of like how they execute their sport is very recurrent in nature. And so they need some sort of reminder to kind of drive the cue, whatever that new cue is, or maybe it's bringing back an old cue to get them back into the positions to execute their sport the way that they need to. Training is no different. And so I really kind of push that as like, hey, great check-in, you got your data in, but we really need to see continued training footage of XYZ, because last time you were on stage, it was the reason we lost or we didn't win the pro card. Or when you get on the pro stage, it's not going to be acceptable, the quality that we put on stage there. And that kind of like emotional pull, right, of like they left something on the table, a lot of times we'll pull them back into it. Now, if those boxes are being ticked, that's kind of where, to me, I think that check-in of, hey, you're doing a great job. Just please keep doing this so that I can keep doing my job for you. And execute on that plan is where that check-in comes into place. When they're submitting all that data, they're submitting check-ins on time, they have their training footage for what you're wanting to focus on within that check-in process. And that's kind of where you start to see that check-in go in the direction of, hey, we're doing a great job. And I think that's kind of just where that makes sense in that off-season phase.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's easy for letting the videos slip off for a lot of athletes. And even as a coach, you've checked off a lift and you just kind of forget about it and you don't revisit it after X period of time. So I think it's okay. Like, if you have those weeks where everything has been moving along well, to like revisit lifts that you haven't seen in a bit. And I think that's helpful to keep a folder of those lifts of weeks to go along, to where when you had those lifts to look at last, especially for weak body parts, because it's going to be really easy for those lifts to start slipping back to what they were prior. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to today's podcast. Are you struggling to hit your peak on show day? Feeling lost in the offseason? Upgrade your coaching game with J3 University. Our program covers everything from offseason to contest prep to peak week, all based from real client results. Along with our comprehensive physique curriculum, you'll also get access to our 4 rooms with our J3U team to answer any questions you have, and live Q&A sessions to further your coaching and athlete experience. We are the source of education for top IFBB pros and coaches. Join us to elevate the coaching standard at J3 University. Let's get back to today's podcast.
Yeah, and it's just something that's so important, and people just don't realize how habitual they are in nature. And like a classic example of this, I have a competitor who, on their rowing for a lat-based pattern, they shifted into rear delt like without even thinking, and it is so easy to do, right? And so having that in the training footage every week, it's such a quick catch. Like, instead of going 5 weeks where you do a rear delt row, you do one set or 1 week of rear delt row and we shift it back to lat, and that progress like added up over the entirety of 1 or 2 pushes is massive because you're not spinning your wheels doing old patterns that left you without a back in the first place on stage. And so I think it's so huge. Like my brain always goes to training, and I know that there's more, and I kind of want to kind of shift this conversation a bit because there's a lot on the PED side and the nutrition side that we need to touch on that I think needs to be understood, kind of the level of expectation on the execution side. But it's because like I said this in a check-in earlier today, like we have 2 aspects of pushing a physique forward. We have the stimulus that drives the adaptation, which is training, which is why we need to focus so much on it to make sure that we're driving the stimulus to that. And then the secondary piece of it is actually adapting to that stimulus. And I think that's where that next conversation comes, John, of like, where do we shift the mindset on the nutrition side and the PED side, and like not only from the athlete but from the coach's perspective of optimizing this for this entirety of this phase? Because if we're going to gain the adaptations of perfecting the training, like this piece of the puzzle has to be intact as well.
Yeah, I mean, this gets down to like the nuts and bolts of programming, and again, a lot of the framework that you're carrying from prep would be moving into off season as well. And that, like, if you had a pyramid, and like the base of this pyramid is still sustainability for all these variables. So with an off season being typically much longer than a contest prep, nutrition, PDs, all this aspect, even training, what's going to keep the athlete sustained in ability to progress throughout the entire phase? And so a lot of times we look at what's optimal on paper, and that's just not going to fit every single athlete, whether it be this extremely strict optimized diet with all these fruit and veggie variety and nailing all these micronutrients, or that just might not be doable for someone. Or maybe it's this flexible diet approach, but it's someone that is so routine and so busy with work that they're not able to have all this diet flexibility, and they actually do better on something a little stricter. So end of the day, the best diet's going to be the one that can be sustained. But as we move someone through the athlete development process, being able to shift this into what might be more optimal for the result. And within optimal, there's going to be a range here as well, because the big picture needs to happen. And then the little nuance things of like meal timing or supplementation at certain times, like this is far less important. And then the same thing goes around PEDs, is sustainability. And where that shifts from contest prep, and how I look at this, is that you might be bringing in things PED-wise. Let's maybe give you a few, like different types of oral steroids, different types of fat burners, maybe more harsher injectables like, say, trenbolone. These things are not sustainable for long periods of time. And that's part of the shift from prep into off-season, is that now we need to be able to sustain this progress. As muscle tissue doesn't grow in just 4 to 6 weeks, we really need to string together months of this to really change someone's visual appearance of muscularity. So if these PDs are leading to a sleep discrepancy, GI issues, the inability to train and keep up with the work capacity and the volume level that you need to drive that stimulus, then that's not the PD design that you should be running, because it kind of defeats the purpose of what our off-season should be to begin with. So that's kind of like where the focus should shift, PD-wise and nutrition-wise, into being sustainable. And typically, at least on the PD side, we see this pretty much heavily leveraging just our injectable-based steroids that are, I should say, not your injectable orals that are 17 alpha alkylated. You're not just doing injectable Anadrol because it still can be impactful. These are still your estified steroids, so they're going to be a little less impactful for overall stress. And then just coming up with a compound design that drives anabolism and being the less benign on your health markers. And a lot's going to work within that. And we have other podcasts that kind of dives into breaking that piece down. And then as far as the nutrition piece goes, I think this is where you really see the big variance of where people can fall off, because off season, right? How can I have more fun food and enjoyability? And part of being sustainable is being enjoyable too. And we usually have like people fall on different sides of the coin on this, of being like extreme all year long, and eventually it could lead to burnout. And also the guy that's all in, super strict, has no tools when goes wrong. Then you have on the other side the person that has extreme flexibility. Problem being is they can't rein things back in, or extra things start going in. Then on the coaching side, it's also hard to know when a problem arises, what's the root issue here. So there needs to be a balance between these two extremes of bringing someone back towards the middle with some shifts around it too. Like some people that don't like to do macros, they're better off with a set plan. It gives them anxiety to do macros. At least needs to build in the skill set of knowing how to do food swaps when problems do arise. Same thing goes for someone that needs a lot of flexibility, that enjoys the more social life. They need enough structure, but understanding of what's okay to be flexible with and what's not. So we're all trying to shift these people back into a little bit more of a tighter range, and with the tool sets for them both to be able to execute strictly, but also have some flexibility built in. And so what that looks like, at least how I program it in a general sense, is that, laying out a strict meal plan with having macronutrients beside, and then having someone that starts to teach them how to log their food. And then we start being able to do just food swaps is an easy one. Or maybe it's just, hey, a meal swap. On this last meal, you can have the flexibility to work within, could be calories, could be the macros, or just simply arranging foods. So this starts to teach people how to do that and utilize that skill along the way. And eventually you get to a point where, off season, you kind of can have all the foods that you want. This is how I do my off season. If I want burgers and pizza, it's stuff that I make at home, because those things are really hard to eat off plan and not have an impact, at least my physique. Everyone's gonna be different here, right? Some people could go and eat something really calorie dense. That's the rarity. And then also, if I do want to go out to have a restaurant, I know the places I can go. Like if I'm doing chicken fajitas or fish tacos or sushi or something like this, it's very close to normal bodybuilding foods that fits within my caloric and macronutrient profiles, to where the next day I feel fine. I sleep good because I'm not up all night with acid reflux, and it's not impacting my recovery and carrying over day after day. And so, that's kind of where you need to move into your off season, of being able to enjoy your foods. However, the ultimate goal isn't lost. The goal stays the goal of improving your physique. And so, the nutrition side's huge. I feel like this is where a lot of people slip, and needs to be pretty controlled in how we move people and develop that athlete process.
Yeah, and it's such low-hanging fruit, right? Like it's such an easy skill to learn if you just take the time to learn it. I chuckle, like you see some people like earlier in they followed the meal plan and they're kind of learning the macronutrient side, and when they start to try to make subs at first, if they don't fully grasp the macro side, they'll just do like 200 grams of potato instead of 200 grams of rice, and you're like, okay, you just like massively underate. But like, let's talk about it and let's learn it, right? Or like to your point, like the meal plans with multiple fruits and veggies in play, like they run out of one fruit on accident and then they just like lose it. It's like these skills are so easy to implement. And I think this is kind of where we raise that glass ceiling with athletes. And something that I kind of want to touch on is as he was mapping out like some of the PED stuff, is understanding and trusting that coach's thought process in managing your recovery metrics, not only within a acute training side of the perspective, but the long-term health considerations as well. Like I'm huge for self-advocacy, but it's more than likely not going to be something that is this shining new supplement or this revolutionary thing that is going to change your off season. It's these things that we're talking about from a consistency standpoint. And so understanding that the PED side might be pretty boring, and that's okay, because it's a component of the progress and the process of improving your physique. It's not the entirety of it. I chuckle when you say like people wanting to do injectable Anadrol instead of like the oral, thinking it's okay, because the amount of times I've had someone respond to me with something like that is uncounted. Like there's so many times. So it's interesting. Like the way that athletes think is you often see them searching for the most revolutionary thing to change their process, when in reality, it's just kind of a look in the mirror of how do I change the way that I execute my process rather than anything else.
Man, you brought up something that could be a whole podcast on its own with the new add-ins, because it's exciting to get in the off season. I understand that. And what are the new things I can try here? And not PEDs, but anything, new exercises, new diet strategies, or new supplements for PED strategies, right? That's going to bring the next best aspect out of my physique. And I get the competitiveness of it. Like I would want to utilize every single tool that I can to maximize my time in this. And it's hard when you're hearing about these new exciting things that are coming out. And there's a lot right now. I think that's where we have a lot of people that information's everywhere. So there's a lot to be learned, a lot to be spoken to, and everything can seem very exciting and revolutionary. And then when you see your actual coaching plan, you're like, man, like all these other guys are talking about X, Y, Z, and we're not using any of them. Like that has to be like on the cutting edge of coaching. And it is exciting. It is something I think to keep our eyes on. But what so many people still don't have nailed are these basics that we're talking about. And it's such a long-term skill to like, I still try to like perfect my training and I miss the mark and I have to keep refining it too. I've been doing this for years. So that's still my big ticket item, or even how I've developed the nutrition process for me of being able to progress, stay lean in the off season and grow like year after year now. Like that's taken a lot of time to perfect, but that's the big ticket item that's done it. All the PD side is relatively the same thing, rinse and repeat. There's not this new exciting thing that's out there that's going to be bringing about that change yet, right? But that's not to say like keep your eye open on these areas, but I think it can be really easy to, for one, take information and oversimplify it, because someone speaking to it could have a very advanced understanding of it, but gosh, how do you retain all that? So it might get down to, well, X drug will help me stay leaner in the off season. And maybe that's not actually how it works. And then that information gets passed around to where now everyone's using X drug to stay lean in the off season. But now it's not actually how it works. And you just have another drug on your list of things that you've added to. So with a coaching, mindset, I like to be able to, when there's an issue, be able to assess it, make a change, and then assess what that outcome is. When I have someone that's now on, we could have been 5 off-season drugs, now on 7, 8. What goes wrong? Like, hey, my appetite crashed this week. What could that have been from? Your injected anadrol, your like retatrutide, or XYZ peptide, or some compound. It makes it a lot more to try to pull apart and assess. So not throwing shade to any of those things. It's just like from an athlete perspective or someone that's getting into this, just make sure you're focusing on your basics, then build in complexity as you need to. But again, that's kind of a rabbit hole to go down. But I think to bring it back here is that taking your prep strategies, mainly executing your routine, goal setting, and then building that into some flexibility with nutrition that can keep you sustained, training that can keep you sustained, and even sleep routine and PD strategy that will be sustainable throughout your offseason is how you're going to make the most progress possible. And a lot of this starts with how we set up coaching with J3U coaching is, being pretty meticulous with data tracking, and also having a very good open communication with athletes. And I think those two things are missing a lot of the time, is that there's like poor data tracking. It's like an email with pictures and your body weight and how'd the week go? And you're like, good. All right, keep going. That lacks a lot in tracking, and it makes it easy to miss the mark. Then with communication too, It's very much of like, here's your plan, go do it. And you don't have to give a lot back as an athlete and think throughout the week. Same with the coaching. So, with our coaching, we use like videos, voice memos to try to really build the relationship and having that open lines of communication to build a personalized plan with athletes. And I think that's where like modern coaching is really pushing big in this space is being better about tracking data and also with communication. So,
yep, 100%. I think that kind of ties it all together. It's more about, like you said, keeping the goal. Assess what the goal is for that phase. Always keep that at the forefront of your mind.
So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Remember, off-season isn't easier. It's just a different kind of hard. I know I mentioned this week we're going to actually be covering men's health. Just kidding. Men's health is actually next week. So I got my dates wrong. So we will get into some personal side for Luke and myself or identity, as males, what that should look like, and also the challenges in business, bodybuilding, and it's going to be a great episode. So tune in for that one next week, and thank you, and we'll talk to you then.